Welcome to UNI.MINDS Festival, and thank you, of course, for choosing this session, Health and ICT session. As you already know by now, the event is organized by eternal rivals, Maribor and Ljubljana, and still we are proving that also rivals can cooperate, especially when we talk about innovation support and also technology transfer. The event is supported by our industry partners and support us from innovation community. The main partner of the event is Novartis Slovenia, and our festival would not be possible without the support of Republic of Slovenia, Ministry of Education, Science and Sport, and of the European Union under the European Regional Development Fund. In this parallel session, we will give you a snapshot of competences, innovative projects, and good collaborative practices in the field of health and ICT. Each speaker will have 3 minutes time for the presentation and followed by 3 minutes of questions and comments. We will notify you, the speakers and also the commentators, about the remaining time. In the end, we will encourage you to open dialogue. We are especially interested in this dialogue in how to join forces for the future development trends. Throughout the event, we will encourage you to keep your cameras on so we can see each other. And now let's go to the technical stuff. First, I ask you to change your view to gallery view. This means side-by-side galleries, so we will be able to see each other. And then when we start with presentations, you can go to presentation view. So this is side-by-side mode, and you will be able to also change the side, so how big the presentation is and how big the speaker is. We, of course, encourage you to rename yourself if you don't have your actual name, so we know how to call you. And we encourage you, of course, to ask questions. During the presentations, you can use the Zoom chat, and then after the presentations, you can also raise your hand, Zoom hand, and speak directly. Also the kind invitation to all of you. If you wish, you can use the UNI.MINDS themed background, the same as some of us are using. My colleague Mitja is posting the link in the chat. And now let's start with the content part. I'm happy to present our moderator, Mojca Pavlin. She is leading the digital health community at Technology Park Ljubljana, and she will be the content moderator from now on. Mojca, please take over.
Thank you, Simona. Welcome everybody to this very interesting panel. We gathered online today to talk about how digitalization will impact the healthcare services. Actually, let me start with this quote. The real innovation lab doesn't live down the road or in some dramatic urban setting with a powerful industrial design. It lives as a neural network that connects and inspires us all. I found this quote on LinkedIn, of course, and it's written by John Nosta, and I took it out of the original context a bit, because this sentence for me reflects the guests I'm hosting today, 7 distinguished and exceptional researchers and entrepreneurs. And I will discuss the cutting-edge scientific approaches which we be all living in the near future. I cannot tell when exactly, or when these developments in research, particularly those based on artificial intelligence or DNA sequencing and complex algorithms will revolutionize our lives. But currently, our healthcare system is lagging in capacities, both in terms of infrastructure, hardware system, software, and of course, trained personnel. Additionally, all of us as a society will also have to look ourselves into the mirror and find out What are the true capabilities of new technologies and what is merely a hype? With this cue, I address the first guest, Mojca Pavlin, researcher and head of lab at the Faculty of Electrical Engineering and Faculty of Medicine at the University of Ljubljana, who will give us a glimpse into her exceptional range of expertise in domain of nano and biotechnological applications. Ms. Pavlin, the screen is yours.
I'm with two institutions. Thank you for very kind introduction. I'm with the Faculty of Medicine and Faculty of Electrical Engineering. And basically we focus on bio-nanotechnology, delivery of small molecules with electroporation and cancer research and related cell signaling, especially cell energy. What is now our current interest? Basically, for the clinical application, we find connection between metabolomics, cell metabolism, and cancer research most interesting. Here, we already prepared a clinical project together with the Medical University grads. So it's a nice combination of in vitro research where we use this is our expertise, our in vitro knowledge, where we combine very systematic and mechanistic analysis of different nutrients and responses of cells. While in the other part of our research, we are a very interdisciplinary group, we connect basic characterization of nanoparticles, physicochemical properties with the response in terms of immunogenicity and nanotoxicity, and we connect it with proteomic research. And now just to show me from my previous research how we have used something also for industrial development. So within my PhD and European project, Cliniparator, we were developing protocols and devices for electroporation delivery. I was developing numerical models and analytical models to describe complex systems, and this research was then used for industrial application for development of magnetic materials within collector group and for wireless power transfer. So with this, I would like to thank all my collaborators from Austria, from several groups in Slovenia, and also most of all my current and former PhD students and other researchers which were in my group. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mojca, but could you please tell us more? What are the trends, where it is going, and where will be most beneficial in medicine, all those applications you are researching on?
So what we see is a lot of interest from the clinical part. This was just by coincidence. We were looking for another collaboration in field of metabolomics, which is especially used for biomarker research. And from this, we are currently see a lot of potential to connect basic knowledge of cellular metabolism, cancer therapy, and clinical applications to find and validate new biomarkers. So here in this, let's say specifically for my field, this specific application, and another is in nanoimmunotoxicology, there are still lack of standardization and also industry searching for more reliable, let's say, testing and in vitro models. And here we are more basic research, but still what we are doing, it's useful because we provide, let's say, protocols and connections from the basic physicochemical to final, let's say, immunoresponse, which is in principle in agreement with 3D strategies. So you can reduce the number of animals, or you cannot do actual experiments on humans. So this is a way to test nanotechnology.
Okay, and you generate a lot of data during your researches, but we are still far away from digitizing laboratory results. Where do you see the potential of machine learning, for example, or an artificial intelligence in cell biology research? This is also a question for my next guest. Mojca, please, could you give us a short answer first?
Yeah, I think that maybe others are more experienced in this, but from my point of view, especially omics, so proteomics, metabolomics, genomics, overlay models, because I was in modeling. So here actually we started to collaborate with the University of Maribor. So we are looking forward to connect metabolomic research with the gene sequencing and then with some other results. So and for this part with the Medical University Graz, there will be a lot of data. So obviously what we are currently ourselves using with statistical analysis is to look at some correlations, but with the artificial intelligence, this can be done on much higher levels. So that you just don't have pure correlations, but on a higher level, you can see some connections. So you go bottom up and top bottom to have some hints, and then from this you can then look at new mechanisms, maybe new targets and so on. So this is how I see it.
Thank you. And Aleš Holobar, what would be your perspective?
Well, I think the answer to the question how fast we can get to the market or to the collaboration with the industrial sector is basically application dependent, right? In some cases, we really need to go step by step to all the security checks, not to cause any problem later on. And in other applications, we are a bit less invasive. Maybe we are tackling with less critical points and can be much faster. So it is application dependent, and it's a whole variety of possible answers here, how fast we can go.
Well, now I'm quite curious what you have to present about advanced human-machine interfaces you are working on. You are professor at Faculty of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science at University of Maribor, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So let me briefly present what we do. We deal with the non-invasive muscle excitation assessment, and this means that we are non-invasive and a bit less problematic when it comes to playing with the parameters of the human body. I come from the Faculty of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science, so basically what we deal with is the electrical signals from the skeletal muscles. The muscles can be seen as biological amplifiers of the neural codes. They spread these codes across the human body, and they amplify them to the extent that they can be measured on the surface of the skin. If you can see, probably not due to the sharing, these are the arrays with which we measure the electrical activity on the surface of the skin, completely non-invasively. But the problem here is that several neurons, several hundreds of neurons contribute the information that is mixed together. And what we have come up in the last decade or so is a technique that decodes, demixes this information from the surface of the skin and allows you to see the individual neural codes. And once you do that, you can use these neural codes for advances in the feedback, in training and rehabilitation, for control of the prosthesis, in neurophysiological investigation, kinesiology, sports sciences, pathophysiological investigations, and many clinical investigations. So there are many applications that can follow out of this. And one crucial advantage of our technique is that it really sees a lot of neural codes. If you compare this to clinical intramuscular needle EMG, which sees only a few neural codes, we can see tens of neural codes. Our record currently is more than 70 neural codes from skeletal muscle. In this example, you can see 42 neural codes extracted from healthy muscle in steady contraction. And just to give you an illustration what we can do with this kind of technology, I list here the neural codes extracted from 5 different motor systems. In the uppermost panel, there is neural codes, 7 neural codes of healthy individual. You can observe the regularity of these firings of these neural codes. Below it's a motor system affected by cerebral palsy, and you can see the huge changes that the cerebral palsy causes to the motor system. The same, but in a different way, is caused by stroke. Essential tremor, as one of the most common movement disorder, synchronizes these neural codes into these bursting activities. And the last one in the bottom, there are neural codes extracted from the transplanted nerve, so after the targeted muscle reinnervation. Another advantage of our technology is that we really pay attention to the strict quality control. We identify the accuracy of each and every extracted neural code, and this allows us for a really reliable estimation of the central nervous system parameters, as well as estimation of anatomic features of investigated muscles. And this leads to many, many different applications. Basically, we are a service for many, many groups in the world that deal with the functional assessment of the human motor system. Let me conclude by giving you an example of our recent activity. What we combined here is this information extraction technology and evoked potentials, so stimulated contractions. And in this case, we identified the neural codes during the transcranial magnetic stimulation of human cortex. And in this way, we connected all the major players in the motor system. So the cortex, the spine, the muscle, and we allow for a really, really objective assessment in many, many different scenarios. Since my time is very limited, let me just thank our founding agencies, and this concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Aleš. And before going, I saw one question in chat, and I welcome Malcolm Skingle. Please, would you like to ask the question to Mr. Holobar by yourself?
Of course, yeah. I just wondered whether or not, I mean, it looks like really excellent technology, the monitoring the muscle. I just wondered if you were at a stage where you could do longitudinal studies and follow cachexia and look at the decrease in muscle capacity with age.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. We are doing that. We are collaborating here with the Japanese researchers, investigating how the different nutrition, how different food affects the muscle aging. So yeah, a short answer is yes, we are doing this. We are following the changes, and there are big changes between the young and the old muscle. And the big question is how fast are these changes occurring, and what can we do to stop or slow this down? Okay, so we are dealing with this. Yes.
I guess if you were to dumb down to a single figure, you know, so a factor, you know, 1 to 10 or whatever on how healthy that muscle was. I mean, I can see how that might have a utility in sort of exercise programs and diet programs. I think that would be a really good innovation.
We are on this topic also. Yeah. Thank you for the question.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I will ask you another, a bit more broader question. Current approach to neurodegenerative diseases seems to be advanced when it comes to utilizing the data and consequently AI-based technologies. How far away are we from real-world clinical approaches and techniques?
Well, I partly answered this in my first answer to your question before I give the talk. It depends. It depends. We at the level of the neurodegenerative diseases, we have proved in several EU projects already that you can really track what is going on in the muscle, and some of the findings were a bit surprising also to the clinicians. But in the clinical world, there is a long way to introduce the new doctrine. So this is a slow way, and I guess it must be slow because we are dealing with the health of humans. In the ergonomics, in the sports sciences, in the everyday life, we can have many more applications which do not demand such a thorough investigation. So depends. We are very close in the field of everyday living, and we need patiently to make all these clinical trials in the clinical sector.
Yes, right. And I think if there will be some time left at the end, we can discuss this with Nicole Arming. Or Nicole, would you like to add something maybe?
I have to unmute myself. No, I think it's a fair point, right? Implementing things that work in clinical trials or that, you know, are in a testing phase into a broad clinical practice obviously takes some time. And the systems also need to move quite a bit, right? If you really want to take the full advantage of these technologies. So, yes.
Yes, and I'm sorry I didn't introduce you properly. Nicole Roche is General Manager of Roche Slovenia. And now, Aleš, who's your usual partners at projects? Which partners do you usually collaborate in your projects?
Well, a short answer would be enthusiasts, and the long answer is a lot of researchers who see the potential in this basic information extraction technology. We collaborate with them extremely well because they are our promoters. They are demonstrating how this technology can be used in the different applications. And after this promotion, we collaborate with the industries like Otobok and Osur, which have much more targeted applications. So it's just a process down the road, basically. Yeah.
Thank you, Aleš. And now is turn for my third guest, Žiga Špiclin. We know each other already for a while. You are a researcher and lecturer at Faculty of Electrical Engineering in Ljubljana and an entrepreneur too. For me, which means on general, your research is quite similar to Aleš Holobar's, but you have taken a step further and commercialized your research as well. What is your take on the field? Probably you will show us in your presentation. Please, the floor is yours.
Exactly. So thank you for the introduction. So my take on the field is, I guess, very similar to what others have done. So in the clinical world, you have to take it slow, you have to take it step by step. But we have one particular advantage because our inputs are digital images. And that means that we can actually play with those images while they are acquired in the actual clinical routine and deliver some outputs in parallel and then verify whether they are useful to the clinical practice or not. I would maybe like to draw your attention, if you see the screen already, to the bottom. So this will be our main approach. So we take the images from the clinical scanner. These are images which are clinical grade images, those that are acquired in the regular clinical routine. And then our contribution, our innovation is to introduce an algorithm which automatically analyzes those images instead of a radiologist, for instance, if you can imagine that. And the output is a structured report, which actually offers some quantitative complementary information to the radiologists, to the neurologists in this case. So I'll be dealing in particular with brain imaging. But let me do just a broad introduction a bit about imaging biomarkers and medical imaging in general. I would say that probably all of you in the audience have in some point in time taken a scan, typically either an ultrasound scan or an MRI scan or a CT scan. And you probably all agree that medical imaging is now really widespread and it's very accessible. But my argument would be that it's not fully exploited yet in terms of its potential. So if I just illustrate this from the advent of medical imaging in 1895 with the first radiograph, the images were mainly utilized for visual assessment. So somebody had to take a look at those images and visually assess the information that's on the images. And with the introduction of a computer in 1980s, the visualization just moved from the radiograph to the screen. And today, I think we are seeing a major transition, which I could just highlight here on the right side, from visual to computer-aided assessment, from assessment which is mainly qualitative to a quantitative assessment, from reporting that it's typically when you get a report from a radiology department, it's a written report, it's unstructured, and what we want to do is structured reporting. And at the end, what the utilization of the images is at the end not only for diagnosis, but it can also be used for prognostic purposes. So what will happen with the patient in the future? What will be the outcomes, and so on? And we are looking at image patterns, and we are searching for such image patterns in the medical images that are correlated with clinical outcomes, and we call those imaging biomarkers. And the good thing is that just in these recent years, the technologies like artificial intelligence have achieved a level of capability to recognize complex patterns such that we can actually do this automatically at the level of performance as a radiologist would do. So what is our use case? So our use case is automated reading of brain MRI scans to monitor response to therapy in patients with multiple sclerosis. And the idea is again pictured here on the right-hand side, is to devise something that we call an image analysis lab. This is similar to blood analysis lab as you're used to it. So the input are the images. The images are acquired in a standardized way and then analyzed with a standardized verified algorithm, and then a structured report is output. And what we measure on those brain MR images is two components of the multiple sclerosis disease. One is the inflammatory process, which we quantify by marking and contouring the lesions, which are shown here in the red, and counting them and measuring their volume. And this is a prognostic factor of what will be the clinical outcome in a few years with the patient, whether the disease will progress fast and it will be more severe at the end, or whether it will progress slower. And the other part is the neurodegeneration, which we measure by contouring the healthy brain structure and measuring their volume. So we measure currently about 140 brain structures, and based on those, we can tell what aspect of the patient will be so to say damaged. What will be the manifestation of the disease on the clinical level? Whether it will be cognition, whether it will be something else like motor function, and so on. And we installed already this at all major Slovenian hospitals and clinical centers, and we are using clinical grade MR scanning protocol. So that means the patients go to imaging as before, and also on the clinical side. So there is no major investment because everything is in line with the current workflow. And what are the benefits of such an approach if you introduce those biomarkers in clinical practice? So this is some objective means of image assessment. It's repeatable, it's standardized, and there are two major, I would say, use cases. So one is for the faster drug development in phase 1 and phase 2 clinical trials, because we are observing something that's under the surface. and it has already been shown that whether if we want to assess the effect of treatment, this can be done much faster with utilizing quantitative image information. It can be done in about 1.2 years compared to 4 years when you just observe the clinical aspects. So for conclusion, I would say that what we are seeing as a clinical manifestation of the disease is a tip of the iceberg. And what we can do with imaging biomarkers, we can look below the surface, and what we can actually do is predict what will be the disability progression in the future, and which disease course the disease will go through based on the image analysis itself. So this is what I had to say, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you, Žiga. Actually, you already answered most of my question, but I have one. You showed us a quite personalized approach, but how we ensure that the data is good enough, or one burden hospitals or on an infrastructure level could be that the infrastructure itself is not good enough or up to date enough for such complex algorithms. Any comments?
So I would say the quality of the data that goes into the algorithm always defines what we can do with those data. And what we did in this case, we actually had a difficult lesson to learn, because one of the things is if you send a patient to a certain scanner and then assess those images, and what we want to do is assess those images on the longitudinal scale. That means if the patient goes to the next scanning, then we need to compare the two images from the baseline and follow-up scan. And it turns out that because patients are mobile, they might go to different sites, to different scanners, and that this is a major limiting factor how to effectively utilize this technology. So if you can utilize one scanner for all the patients, that would be the best. But actually, this is something that they do. For instance, in Prague, they have 4,000 patients, which they channel through the same scanner. And they fear to change the scanner just because it might affect the quality of the data in the longitudinal aspect, right? And for instance, we have about 3,000 patients, but they tend to go to the nearest scanner. So the question is, this is something that we could improve on.
Thank you. And this is something like even my next guest understands well and could comment. The other day, Andraž, I read an article about how deep learning algorithms are peering into MRIs and X-rays in Nature magazine. And the subtitle was Artificial Intelligence Won't Replace Radiologists, but Radiologists who use artificial intelligence will replace radiologists who don't. Would you agree, Andraž? Because I believe Žiga agrees completely.
Yeah, I definitely agree as well. I mean, artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep data analysis, whatever you call this new trend, is going to be just another, element in the toolbox of a medical profession. Simplifying their life, making sure that the quality of the health treatment is better, and making sure that the end results are better.
Exactly, and I knew that you will find the right words. And just to introduce you shortly, Andraž Logar, you are the founder and CEO of 3FS, which develops the most demanding digital solutions for multinational companies worldwide, and is known for deploying innovation through spin-offs. I might come to that later on in debate, but now we are going from the real world data, Žiga's data, to augmented reality, where we control the construct. Please, Andraž.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for the intro. So I will be as quick as possible, hopefully, enabling some questions later on. My name is Andraž Logar. I'm coming from an industry, so a company called 3FS. Some quick info on us. We've been alive for the last 16 years. There's around 100 people involved in the 3FS live. We have 3 office locations, even though that's a bit irrelevant these days with being pretty much remotely working. And we have spun out 4 spin-off companies with its own intellectual property, which is our way of actually creating and enabling intellectual property created inside of 3FS. What we do in general on the 3FS side is we service these 4 industries with our IT knowledge, end-to-end IT knowledge. So MedTech seems to be the #1 these days, where we play or where we service and enable multinational companies around the world with IoT solutions, patient registries, and lately also augmented reality solutions. On Industry 4.0, we mainly offer IoT solutions. Telco, that's been our oldest industry, and we've been pretty much involved in every element of a telco, and lately, of course, that is 5G and IoT. And in the finance sector, we've been involved lately in the cloud compliant infrastructure, because also the financing world is actually moving to the cloud infrastructure. Moving basically directly to the point that I'm trying to make this today, or the presentation, and that is what we've been doing for the last couple of years around advanced medical simulations using augmented reality. And we call this product or this platform Awake. So our history in terms of augmented reality goes way long back. So our first, let's say, experiment happened 12 years ago. And then it was put on pause for a couple of years, and then with the VR, augmented reality glasses, this element of our R&D emerged again. And because at that time we've been also servicing medical industries or medtech, we thought and we saw an incredible opportunity to actually use this technology in the medical field. So usually when we are dealing with R&D, we start with the problems. And these are the problems that we identified when it comes to using augmented reality, but even before. So what are the low-hanging fruits that we see when it comes to, for example, medical training? What are the low-hanging fruits that can be solved fairly easily? And what are the elements that could be solved, of course, a little bit more in a complex fashion? And we saw that a big problem in the medical field and in the medtech industry is the frequency of the medical training, the quality as well. The mobility is also a problem, because usually the training happens either in hospitals or in specifically built simulation centers. And everything is, of high cost currently. I mean, such high cost that even the, medical systems find it, let's say, costly. I'm not going to even mention, let's say, the average Joe out there. And we are still dealing with fairly outdated technologies, which are expensive to buy, expensive to maintain, specifically rubber dolls with sensors. And because there are a lot of complexities involved in the medical training, from the doctors to the medical staff to the average Joe, it's almost impossible or fairly impossible to actually service every single audience in this particular field. And we thought that potentially we could solve or address this issue by a proposition of, should we use, a bleeding edge augmented reality platform with some sort of a parametrically driven platform behind it that is programmed internally inside of 3FS. We took industry grade device. In our case, that was Microsoft HoloLens 1 and later on HoloLens 2. So we're not dealing with the low end devices because of the industry standards. And we think that usually the best results are achieved by throwing an interdisciplinary team to the problem. And this is exactly what we did. So what you're seeing right now is a photo of a rubber doll in the simulation center in Ljubljana, which I think most of you have seen it before, or at least some sort of a form of a rubber doll. Here is another one, and this is again a photo from the simulation center in Ljubljana. So what we're seeing here are fairly expensive, fairly highly maintainable rubber dolls that are there just to simulate a couple of, let's say, medical events or medical, mostly events that the trainees are there to solve. But we moved, of course, a step forward. We took these glasses, so that was 3 to 4 years ago. What you see right now is Microsoft HoloLens 1. Now we're dealing with Microsoft HoloLens 2. And this is what we ended up with. So what you're seeing is basically a replica of a rubber doll in the virtual environment. We call her Alice. And this is exactly what's going on when you actually project these LEs into the real environment using the holographic glasses. So on the left, you see our fashion model, of course, but on the right, you actually see our medical profession that is employed by the simulation center in Ljubljana, actually training the trainee how to solve or how to handle anaphylactic shock, which was our first medical simulation that we did using augmented reality. And a couple of more photos. So you'll see that basically the whole scenario of dealing with Alice, from her entering the ER to actually making sure that we get all of the elements tested, and to actually simplify the diagnostic process, and later on also simplifying or making sure that the treatment process is also fairly well understood. We actually bring Alice pretty much back to life. And the results. So what you saw was our first example of using augmented reality in the simulations element of the medical profession. We are now moving a lot further on, but I think we should stop for a second and observe and potentially analyze the results. So what we saw is, first of all, the cost of simulation went down by 70%. That is quite a drastic improvement. We saw an incredible improvement on the particular topic of how to decrease the work and the intensity on the medical simulation personnel, because those guys and girls, they are extremely, you know, first of all, in a stressful situation, pretty much nonstop. They need to work in the ER and then teach the medical staff. So whatever you can do in order to decrease the workload on their side is of huge importance. We also decreased the time of the simulation basically by half. So the specific anaphylactic shock that you saw, in our case, only takes around 20 minutes to actually go from the beginning to the end. While in, let's say, the old
Andraž, you need to wrap it up. You have overlapped your time.
Cool. And what's also important is that later on, we also made sure that the stickiness of the knowledge is highly improved as well. That's my wrap up. Thanks.
Thank you, Andraž. And we got one question from the audience. Urška, would you like to ask the question by yourself, please? Well,
she said no.
Okay. So I will read the question. And now that COVID changed our realities, was the uptake of VR faster, and how much has the development been accelerated?
So we saw that the impulses from the industry, specifically from the medtech industries, from the companies that actually build medical devices like ventilation machines and ECMOs and stuff like that. Yes, those guys approached us in a much more aggressive fashion, saying that, you know, we need to train our medical staff on our high-end ventilation machines, and we can't do this stuff in person anymore. So would you apply this knowledge and this platform to our cases? Of course, we are here to say yes to this kind of queries.
Yes, I also have a couple of questions, but we'll save them for later because we have 3 more to go. And now we are coming to the point I would call data and more data. Urban Bren, among other, you are Vice Rector for Knowledge Transfer at University of Maribor. Supercomputers and artificial intelligence are changing as well as speeding up the drug discovery and related research or processes. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the nice introduction. So what I will talk about today is about computer-assisted drug design, especially in the field of antiviral compounds. Now, why is this important? I mean, it's definitely, I will try to. I have just a bit of an issue here. Yes. Okay.
Maybe Zoom covered you the.
Yeah. Now it's fine. So I will not talk about SARS-CoV-2, though we are also dealing with that area of research. But the results are still, let's say, too early in the process to really present. So I will instead rather deliver a short lecture on the avian influenza A virus. So we were dealing with flu and how to not vaccinate against the flu, but how to design antiviral drugs, and even better, how to make them more potent. And for that, we use our supercomputer facilities. I hope that everyone is familiar with Hapici River. It's the supercomputer facility being built at the University of Maribor at the expense of some 20 million euro. It will be the biggest supercomputer center here in the radius of 300 kilometers. But if we look at the virus, it has some important enzymes which it needs for it to be viral, to actually make us ill. One of them is hemagglutinin. The other one, which we were actually working on, is neuraminidase. And on the right side, you actually have a 3D structure, a crystal structure of this enzyme, neuraminidase, which already has inside a small molecule inhibitor that inhibits its development, and therefore making the virus non-viral. And what you can see is that this small molecule inhibitor is called Tamiflu. You have probably heard of this drug when the avian influenza or bird flu was at its peak. So we used computer models and we looked at this Tamiflu molecule, and we basically proposed a sketch for every possible drug candidate, for every inhibitor that can actually inhibit this neuraminidase and consequently stop the development of the disease. And here you see that it needs to have a negative charged group, which is carboxylate in the case of Tamiflu. But we saw that this negatively charged group interacts with 3 positively charged arginine residues. So we said, okay, carboxylate only has 2 negatively charged oxygens. It would be better replaced by a different functional group, which would have 3 negatively charged oxygens, so that each one could make its own interaction, its own bridge to the each of the individual 3 positively charged arginines. So what were the 2 chemical groups that we came up with? One was the phosphonate group, and the other one was the sulfonate group. So what we did next was molecular dynamic simulations. We performed these simulations in water environment, that means aqueous environment, let's say in our cells, and the same simulation of our, let's say, inhibitor in the active site of the viral neuraminidase. And the difference between the 2 environments gives us the measurement of the potency of the binding. And what did computers predict? Computers predicted around 1,000 times bigger affinity of the newly proposed modified drug in comparison to the existing Tamiflu. So what we did next was we went to Professor Mark von Itzstein in Australia, and after quite a difficult process, he was able to synthesize our sulfonate inhibitors. it took them over 3 years of really hard work, synthetic chemistry, and the in vitro tests, that means tests in test tubes, actually confirmed our predictions. The new compound was more than 900 times more potent against the neuroaminidase. But what is even more important, that this new modulated drug is also effective against viral strains that are Tamiflu resistant. So also with these viral strains in vivo, it does its effect, and it does it very potently. So this is like a very nice story we are proud of, and it will now enter the clinical trials for detection of possible side effects and, of course, its final efficacy. Thank you for your attention.
Urban, thank you. I prepared a question to you as well, but I will save it for later because I think it might be of interest for Nicole as well, because as far as I know, the Tamiflu is one of the Roche's drugs, and
that's correct.
Now, yes. Do you agree, Nicole, that we came back? I would suggest to listen first to Mr. Kos and you, and then I believe the debate will develop by itself. Mr. Bren and Mr. Kos, I know you both trust the future of drug discovery as well as clinical pharmacy relies on large volumes of relevant data. That actually changes the science. But what about people with the right set of knowledge? How much actually our academia is following to empower young talents with the right set of knowledge and skills? I think this is for later on also a question for all, but maybe just a short reflection by you both.
Okay, if I start, I mean, of course, these fields of data mining, of computer simulations, they are relatively new and also relatively new to the academia, but definitely all of them are sort of getting into the real life practice also during the educational processes. For example, we teach subjects like molecular modeling, like computer simulations, also to our graduate students, which will get adapted with this knowledge for the future. I believe that, of course, this now is not the core trend of the science that we are teaching, but it is starting to develop into a core business of the science we're teaching, and this will only grow in the future. So I am positive that our students are already now getting some of the necessary knowledge, and that this will be even more so in the future curricula. That would be from my side.
Yeah, I would say it's all about numbers. It is important to have the critical mass of resources, of money, of staff, and so on. I would say the academia is trying to follow the trends, of course, but at the moment, you always face certain obstacles that you're trying to overcome, and we are more or less successful depending on the area.
Yes, thank you. And Mitja Kos, you are a professor from Faculty of Pharmacy, and I have to say that I came across the field of social pharmacy for the first time, and I'm impressed about the wider implication of research. Generally speaking, basic research do not have to take socio-economic environment into consideration, but what this research, I mean, your research means for a patient. Probably you will tackle a bit this topic in your presentation. However, please answer me to that later on.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to be with you here today. So I am a member of a very young department of social pharmacy at the Faculty of Pharmacy. And in the past years, we have earned our PhDs, and now it's really the time to move forward and to connect what we have done in the past with something in the future. And as you can see from the title, I'm supposed to say something about clinical pharmacy. So what is it all about? So basically, clinical pharmacy is something, it's the role of the pharmacist. And it's a developing role in order to optimize and rationalize the use of medicines. So what's behind that is actually the issues with medicines in real clinical practice, once the medicine is already developed, registered, and already in the practice. And these issues of medicines, we call them drug-related problems. And to give you an example, for example, adherence of patients is one of such potential drug-related problems and so on. And from our research that we have done for several chronic diseases, we know that in Slovenia, at least, it is around 25% of patients that are really purely adherent. We can connect this also with the health outcomes. In some other countries, and some other occasions, this could be as far as 50% or even more. So the pharmacy profession was trying to develop several services, and nowadays we particularly focus on the so-called medication review services. And we also performed a study over here. It was actually a randomized controlled trial of one of the potential services. And we do have a service that works, but the real question is for whom it works. Of course, for the patient in needs. If I connect with the adherence that we said, of course, the service that tries to improve the adherence works for the patients that are purely adherent. So it's the real question is how to actually select those patients, how to recognize them in the most efficient way. And if a physician has 7 minutes for a patient, the pharmacist has even less. So how to do this in a rational way? So it's a question of how to target the patients. And then once you have the patient, how to tailor the services for them in order to address their needs. So perhaps I should start with this to be a more fancy, because I put this digital transformation in the title. But most probably the healthcare workers would not have dentines in their skull as Stephen Harbison did, so on. So I'll try to be more realistic, and I'll focus on 3 things at the moment. So one of them would be the clinical decision support system, which is really a system. It is electronic that should be integrated in the workflow and of course also automated. Basically, it's constructed of 2 elements. One is the knowledge base. And you can imagine, for example, that you have a knowledge about drug-drug interactions or inappropriate medicine for the older age and so on. And you connect this knowledge base with the patient data. That means that you need to know some characteristics of the patient. You need to talk with the patient or have some clinical data about the patient. And together, of course, the system can produce alerts or even more. It could even recommend some things and activities of what to do. And if this works well, and if it's validated well, and this is something we can do, we can develop such systems and we can validate them, they will produce some definite health outcomes. And of course, if you want to be fancy and use another word, we could put artificial intelligence here and make some loops to really establish such a system at the highest possible level. So one of the things to develop is this knowledge base behind. And of course, the input from here could be from the randomized controlled trials and trials before the registration of medicines or some other trials. But one particular area that connects with my previous speaker is the big data. But what the big data actually means for us, for our work at our department at the moment, we would call it pharmacoepidemiology. And it is based on the healthcare databases that we have in Slovenia. And they are big in the sense that there are more than 70 databases that we have here. They're big in a sense that they are there and we haven't really used them in the past. But on the contrary, we are only 2 million population. And of course, somebody would joke about the level of big data and so on. That means that we need to connect with other experts. For example, the previous week, we just filed a bid for a project at the European Medicines Agency with the partners in most of the EU countries that will investigate how to connect all the different databases that we have in our practices and so on. And based on this, of course, several projects can follow and so on, and we can really do great things. Because pharmacoepi is all about trying to connect the exposures, such as medicine or some other data, with the outcomes of patients. And last but not least, it is all about how to deal with the patients. Of course, we have these mobile devices and so on. So even myself have a watch, and most probably everybody here has a kind of gadget and so on. But the real clear question here behind is whether our physicians can use the data that we produce, and we measure everything, and during the day, during the night, all the different possible activities and so on. But can our physician actually use? So it's a question of the standards. It's a question whether there is a proof, because I'm a pharmacist and I'm coming from the area of medicines. How long does it take for medicine to actually get it registered and so on? It's a lot of data, a lot of studies and so on to actually prove that it is at a sufficient level of safety and effectiveness to actually allow such kind of things in practice. Of course, we cannot expect something like this with the mobile devices, but something similar, and maybe at a lower level, but still towards that direction. So it's a question how to prove that benefit, and it's also a question of so-called health technology assessment, which is another area which we do, including the health economics. So what is the criteria to actually judge such devices and actually allow them to get into the clinical practice?
Unfortunately, we have to wrap it up slowly.
I just finished, and
okay.
The Americans, for example, call such kind of things the digital therapeutics, and actually the physician can actually prescribe such medical devices for the patients. Thank you.
Yeah, and Mitja, we came with Simona at the same time when you were mentioning and talking about data. I was, oh no, big data again, and I was hoping so much that you will come back to mHealth as well. Today, doctors actually can prescribe apps as part of the treatment in some regions already, for example, in Germany. And when do you think users can trust mHealth products and services as we trust antibiotics to work?
Well, I think you need to have a certain proof of and validate the devices and technologies that we are supposed to use in the practice. And here are two concerns. One is the safety, and the other one is also the benefits that such technologies can use. And if we take the German example, they passed the law last year. I think it was in July and so on. So it's not something old, it's something really new and so on. And the way they establish it is the German Federal Institute for Drugs and Medical Devices. They actually test the security, data protection, and functionality. And it's a question of the whole system in how they uptake such devices.
Yes, and nowadays they have 2 apps which doctors can prescribe already. I also find this information somewhere in one of the magazines. And now this leads me to my last guest, Nicole Arming. Nicole, you are coming from Roche, and I have to say that during conversation with all my previous speakers, I thought of you and Roche. First, you are coming from the industry and company which believes that personalized healthcare is a must and the right step forward. That's your vision. I mean, vision of your company you are representing. And secondly, we heard many examples about supercomputer predictions, wet labs, AI supporting drug design and diagnostics. So does Roche also work with AI-focused startups and universities?
Yeah, so thank you, Mojca, for the question. Actually, thank you all too for the very interesting presentation. I feel like it was kind of a kaleidoscope of opportunities. And we're also active in many of these areas. So it was really nice to see all that progress which would hopefully ultimately benefit patients. To your question, Mojca, yes, of course we do. Just recently, I think it was in October, we signed a collaboration with Genesis, which is a spin-off of Stanford University, also for artificial intelligence-based drug discovery. Now I'm regretting that because I think we should have probably, looked closer in Slovenia and asked Urban to help us with our antivirals. But we're doing a lot in the area of drug discovery and also in clinical practice, to use algorithms to support clinical practice. For example, we had a collaboration with the University of Vienna, very similar technology to what Žiga was talking about, looking at eye scans in this case and trying to develop algorithms that would predict the disease progressions of people with certain degenerative eye diseases. It's essential for us, the collaboration with academia. Yeah.
Yes, I believe so. And now your presentation will be a great wrap up of today's session and a showcase how to make a digital healthcare reality. Please, Nicole, tell us more about Floodlight.
Yeah, so Floodlight, I think I just want to build on Mitja's presentation and also Žiga's presentation. But I don't know if you guys can see my cell phone here. A normal cell phone, standard as all of us have it in the pocket. And I really believe that this can be a game changer for many of patients with chronic diseases. I can tell you maybe a bit about my own personal example. One of my best friends, he was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis when in our first year at university. And he found out because from one day to another, he had difficulties to move his left arm and his left leg. And what was first thought to be a stroke, right, turned out as a diagnosis of multiple sclerosis, which is a chronic disease that impacts about 2.3 million people worldwide. And why is it so difficult to get this diagnosis for a patient? Just because each and every of these patients is really unique. There's patients that have episodes of the disease where they experience really severe symptoms while they have times when they feel quite well and they can actually almost live a normal life, as opposed to other patients that experience a steady progression of the symptoms until, a certain level of disability. And for my friend Renee, it was really hard to get that diagnosis because no one could actually tell him what his life with the disease would look like. And how even the next day, the next week, the next month would look like for him. And in 2007 we went on vacation together, and you have to imagine that it was even hard to predict whether we could do a hike the next day because he wasn't sure how he was feeling and whether he would be able to do that. And also for clinicians that treat this type of patients, it's really hard, and the nurses, to give them the best optimal care, because they see them every 6 months. They do certain cognitive tests with them, certain motoric tests with them, but they don't know how the patient is performing on each and every day in between those visits. I think this is where, I fundamentally believe that technologies like, my watch or my phone will come into play and really be a game changer. And this is why, those things really, monitor a lot of data on us. You can actively monitor, how you're feeling. You can do certain motoric tests on the phones, but also passively, it monitors your movement. It monitors whether you're shaking or not. And what can we do with this data? We can use it, both the patients as well as the physicians can use it for a number of things. So first of all, trying to find out what might be factors that impact, certain symptoms to appear or not. Then hopefully, you could find certain patterns and predict when a patient might be progressing or have severe stages of the disease and intervene early, proactively intervene before there is actually irreversible progression of the disease happening. And I think lastly, it will also help us to use the resources that we have optimally. because the patients will not see physicians and nurses at a predefined schedule, but they will actually see them when they most need it. And hopefully when there's still, you know, a possibility to interfere in the disease progression. And that's why I think I'm equally excited as Mitja about the possibilities of mobile technologies in the area of healthcare. I don't hear you, Mojca, I'm sorry.
Sorry. Well, thank you, Nicole. I think we got a bit broader context of the healthcare, how and where will be the role of new research and technologies in the future. You described well through your presentation, but since you are coming from abroad and maybe because of that you see us a bit differently, what do you think, what is needed in order to implement that kind of or types of solutions in a local healthcare system?
Yeah, you know, to be honest, Mojca, I think, you know, obviously the US is maybe a bit more advanced in this, but I think we're all still on the journey of figuring this out. And I think many of the things have been mentioned already by the other speakers. So I think the first thing that's really important is solid clinical validation of these tools. I mean, to get a medicine to the market, you know, we have to undergo thorough studies. And if we want to bring these algorithms or these tools and devices to the market that will actually impact the patient's treatment, they have to go an equally thoroughly review process. And then I think it's, you know, essential that the healthcare system can actually adopt them. And that starts with, you know, you need to be able actually to connect that data you're collecting with the patient records in an automated way. You know, some of these tools need to get reimbursed because otherwise people don't have incentives to develop them. And also the financing has to support, you know, this development, because if a hospital is incentivized seeing the patients, you know, as much as they can, rather than, you know, helping to manage them, you know, through maybe, you know, telemedicine or through digital channels, you know, there's little incentives also for the system to adapt those possibilities. Yeah.
Okay, we got another question from Urška Rauter for you, Nicole. You partly already answered, but still, wearables have been made by all major tech providers, even Amazon most recently, but those companies do not work with patients primarily. How is pharma's approach to mHealth better?
You know, the question is, what is better? I think, you know, we're all looking at it through different lenses. We all have different set of capabilities. We personally are also collaborating, you know, with some of these tech providers on different projects, whether it's Google, whether it's GE Health or others. So I think it's, you know, it's all about partnerships in that space if we're trying to move it, because we have players with different set of capabilities and knowledge. And I think if we bring them together on the right topics, I think we can move the space together.
Thank you, Nicole. And now we have a few minutes left for the discussion. If there will be no further questions, I would open a debate maybe on a bit different topic. Let's say how academia can cope. Yes.
Mojca, just sorry to interrupt you, but Urša Salentiger has a question. Urška, will you post a question yourself?
Yes. Hi, sure. I can also put it here. Thank you for the discussion, very good one, and also practical, so I liked it. Due to the previous question that already referred, there are many possible solutions also in tech, of course, on which technology to focus. And since there are a lot of costs involved in this, so from all the perspective, the software, hardware, and so on, and also to put it in practice, you know, so people have to have those devices. So my kind of question would be on which technology do you better see the most potential to evolve further solutions? So like Andraž before showcased, their cases are based on AR, on which technology do you see the most practical use cases also in the practice in the field, you know, so you will use it in the further development? Because you can't do it on all, you know, it's too costly, no standards, and so, or are there already some standards and certificates on which you will focus more?
Mojca, is this a question for me or just general?
I would say general, but I think that you have most
right.
practical experience and you have already decided that you probably will focus more on AR, or...
From our perspective, there is no real difference between VR, AR, and AMR. So there are, of course, elements of where the difference is seen, but when it comes to the underlying technologies, it's pretty much the same. So we're talking about the technology that came from the gaming environment that is now being used for the medical or for the enhanced reality environment. Sure, glasses will be different. The cost of the glasses or of the devices will be different, but the underlying technology is pretty much the same. So I don't see that as a big issue. Of course, when it comes to the medical field, there are some specifics here. Hence, our bet is mostly on the AR because we see that people need to be aware of the surroundings. They need to be aware of the fact that they don't bump into each other and into the patients. Hence, they need to see and understand the environment, which is something that augmented reality by definition kind of allows you to do. Standards out there, yeah, as I said, standards are actually coming from the gaming industry or the simulation or digital twin industry, which has been developed, 20, 30 years ago and has matured. So now you can off the shelf buy engines that allow you to do this stuff, but the real R&D actually happens a step before that. So how do you prepare the data? How do you normalize the data? And of course, how you create actually the added value content that makes the medical field embrace the technology, embrace your solution, and actually pay for your solution.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Cool. Thank you very much, Andraž.
Yes, and let's talk some more about academia. How can academia and R&D companies collaborate? I believe, Mojca, for example, you mentioned an interesting story on how basic research helped one of our biggest companies, Collector. Can I tell you a bit more? Because I believe you transferred not the final results of your basic research, but more your knowledge about processes, methodologies, etc.
Yeah, so I think somebody mentioned enthusiast. So my experience is that basically you need at least two enthusiasts on two sides. The same story was with the medical university grads. The other keyword for me is collaboration. So I think in 95% you find really something new happening because you join together the people from different fields, then interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary. So in our group, I'm basically a physicist, but my PhD was in biophysics and already in vitro, so on cells. So in a way, I think this gives you opportunity also to collaborate with industry, because if you work in a very interdisciplinary group, then you understand the mindset of, let's say, engineer, mathematician, statistician, medical doctor. So our niche is that in a way we are broad, but maybe this is our niche because we connect the knowledge which is otherwise not connected. But for the industry, I think it's a nice example that for some things, you just have to have, let's say, somebody in the industry. The person on the other side was trained, had a PhD, obviously. He started in academia as assistant, then went very soon in the industry. So you need at least two person, let's say, reaching out, understanding the other. So we have to understand that industry, on the end, they have to sell something, improve the project. We started with joint PhD. This was a very good thing to do. So in a way, there was a very small investment. but the result was really, really huge. So they could use it in development. It was added value for the new materials and applications. So, well, this is my my experience.
Thank you. And I think the enthusiasts were mentioned by Aleš Holobar, and I know that his story is also about two high-profile researchers from US, which started a business inspired by his research results. Is it true, Aleš?
Yeah, this is an anecdote that I can share. A couple of years ago, we investigated the muscle cramps. So we showed how you can elicit muscle cramps and how to measure muscle cramps. And two guys, one happens to be a Nobel laureate in chemistry, used this technology and mixed it with nutrition. So they basically prepared different drinks for the testing subjects. And by our technology, they invented the drink which prevents cramp. When I shared this with my wife, she congratulated me. And at the same time, I saw her look in the eyes, knowing that this was a missed opportunity. Not in a million years I would mix our technology with the bananas and cucumbers to come up with the drink that prevents cramps. But this is exactly an example of interdisciplinarity that can lead to severe and real business. So it was achievement and underachievement at the same time for me.
Yes. Should I research smoothies or muscles with algorithms? This is the big question now. Yes. And actually, talking about the business, Žiga Špiclin, I have also a question for you. Like your solution for assessing response for multiple sclerosis is already in use by radiologists, we heard. But how the collaboration with the hospital or with doctors started? Did radiologists came to you or vice versa?
So it was actually the way you proposed the first. So the radiologist who was actually bored of looking at images and counting lesions, because this was something that was introduced in the guidelines at the time. That was about 2011. And he had to count about 9 lesions at specific locations of the brain. And then he could deliver the answer to the post-clinical question, whether this patient has diagnosis or not, and so on. And the second part was also when he was assessing images in a longitudinal manner, so comparing two images, he had to identify in about 150 2D images the differences. So this is like playing, you know, the games that are typically at the back of the newspaper. So can you find the difference between the two images? So doing, I would say, many radiological assessments per day, like about 40 times 150 2D images that you have to compare. This is really a large burden for a person to carry, right? So he was convinced that we can offer him a solution when we actually then started like that. So started also with PhD subjects on the matter. So we had 2 PhD students working on the subject, and they delivered solutions for the first problem and for the second problem, and then things went naturally to the final solution.
Thank you. And now we are coming to an end, and maybe one, I have prepared so many questions, and we do not have enough time for all of them, but maybe one for all. Where should Slovenia focus its efforts in digitizing healthcare? Who would start? Žiga?
Okay,
you
since
are
I'm
still
already
on screen.
Unmuted. I would say, while having introduced this solution and coming into this this society of startups, I actually didn't have a clue before that there are so many applications which are quite mature in similar fields. and that there are a lot of companies, actually maybe a few hundred meters from where I sit currently, that actually are good, innovative key players in the fields. For instance, one company is Parsec, for instance, if I can mention it, who actually does this integration of electronic health records, and we actually were quite surprised that we have complementary solutions to offer. So I would say we would need to have more of such meetings, talk to each other, and try to identify where is the potential for collaboration, because I think it's even though these technologies today that we use offer collaboration throughout the planet, I think it's still good to meet in person and to do something with actual hands, and should be also easier. So I think there's a lot of potential in this region, and we should use it, I guess, put it to use.
That's true. Anybody else? Maybe Urban, Bren?
Yeah, I guess it all starts at the physician's office, where we still use stacks of papers for every relevant medical data. If it were actually machine written, machine readable, that would be a huge step forward, and it would really facilitate future treatments in a much better organized way.
Yes, and Mitja, how all these changes will affect us, common people?
Well, to combine the two questions, basically, I would answer with the health economics answer. So, do we have technologies that will, I don't know, prolong survival? Will they improve the quality of life of patients and so on? And then the answer is simple, because you need to sell this to somebody, and the payer will pay for improvements, real improvements, and not just technical solutions and so on. So what about the people? Of course, they will benefit from this.
Yes, and that would be all, I think. I would now give a floor to Simona for some wrap-up words. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed as much as I enjoyed.
Thank you for joining us today. As we've seen already, unfortunately, we have used all the foreseen time, but we can continue the discussion in Mojca. I will shortly put on the QR code where you can, with instructions on how to use and download Mojca app. This app namely provides or offers the possibility to meet with speakers, other attendees and organizers. You can talk to them, create discussion topics, meetups, share articles and more. And my colleague Matthias already posted in the chat box the guide of how to download and use the Mojca app. Just before we wrap up, we would kindly like to invite you to the second Researchers Day of Novartis Slovenia, which will start at 12 o'clock today. Also join us for the next events in Smart Future on 17th of November. You can also tune in to live stream of Rector's Award on 12th November. And companies are kindly invited to our bonus workshops that our researchers are offering as part of the UNI.MINDS festival. So take care, keep an open mind, and see you next time. Thank you to all. You were perfect.